My parents have completely changed the course of my life by favoring my sister and treating me as if I am not important. They have raised her to be their prized child while I have been left feeling like the unwanted one. I am sharing this story again because I cannot update my situation without including this background. It remains unchanged from the first time I posted it, only this caption is new. I recently came across a similar story online that resonated with me deeply, prompting me to share my own experience. This is my only post on Reddit, and I hope that recounting my story will help me feel a bit better. I've been through some counseling, and discussing this particular issue has been beneficial to me, so I thought sharing it online could provide additional relief. I turned 18 this year, and I have just recently started living independently, away from my parents. I have a sister who is about 10 years younger than I am. She was an unexpected pregnancy, and my parents almost lost her before she was born. I don't know all the details about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, but it was challenging enough that my mother was unable to have more children after my sister was born. She spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital during that year, and there were moments when my mother's health was so precarious that she nearly didn't survive the birth. This near tragedy seemed to create a strong bond between my parents and my little sister. Because she could have easily never been born, they clung to her even more tightly. Since then, I have often felt like I was just another child in the house, except when they needed me to babysit for my sister. The favoritism my parents displayed over the years has led me to believe they must not have realized how harmful their actions were to me. Now, it seems that their choices are starting to come back to haunt them, which I will explain further. The first significant instance that stands out to me occurred on my 11th birthday. My parents insisted that I allow my sister, who was only 2 years old at the time, to blow out my birthday candles because she was upset about seeing a cake that wasn't hers. I was reluctant, but my parents pressured me into letting her do it. They even relit the candles so I could blow them out again after her, but the moment was ruined. This same scenario played out every year after that. They continued to force this arrangement until it became a regular occurrence, and my sister ended up receiving presents on my birthdays as well. I never received anything on hers, and when I questioned my parents about it, their response was that boys don't need to worry about such things as much. I was still a child, but did they really think that was a wise thing to say? Moreover, my parents always chose places for my birthday celebrations based on what my sister would prefer, effectively creating a situation where it felt like she was the one with 2 birthdays each year while I had none. My parents centered their entire lives around my sister. If there was something I wanted to do, it would only be approved if my sister wanted to do it too, otherwise, it was outright vetoed unless I could pursue the activity alone. I learned to hide away in my room, immersing myself in video games because that was the only place where I felt relatively undisturbed, unless my sister decided to burst in to annoy me. To maintain my privacy, I put a lock on my bedroom door, which my parents wanted me to remove. I became upset about this because I was a frustrated teenager who was tired of being interrupted at any moment, especially when my sister would sometimes run in when I was undressed. When I pointed out how ridiculous that was, my parents eventually allowed me to keep the lock. As for my sister, she developed a sense of entitlement due to the way she was spoiled daily. She became very demanding, and I tried to stay away from her as much as possible. I made up excuses just to avoid having to interact with her, needing time to myself. My parents eventually hired a teenage girl to babysit my sister, which gave me more personal freedom for a while. However, this babysitter eventually quit because my sister wouldn't listen to her. My parents tried to avoid paying her by claiming she did a poor job. After the babysitter got others involved, my parents finally paid what they owed. They then hired another girl to babysit on a regular basis, but this situation was complicated. I was supposed to watch my sister whenever I had free time, and my parents made that clear. I tried hard to stay busy with my part-time job to avoid spending time with her. She treated me like a servant, constantly telling me what to do. She even had a ridiculous nickname for me that she wouldn't stop using. Just hearing that name made me furious. If I didn't give her what she wanted, she would cry and tell our parents, which always led to me getting into trouble for not being nice to her. This led to many big fights between us. Over time, things got so bad that I started barely speaking to my parents. The tension grew, and it felt like a wall was built between us. Despite this, during my high school graduation, my parents had the audacity to boast to other parents about how they inspired my hard work. They weren't entirely wrong, but they had a different idea of what motivated me. I worked hard, but not because they pushed me. I was just counting the days until I could be free from the responsibilities they placed on me. It felt like they had forgotten about me after my sister was born. They only seemed to care about her. They wouldn't even ask about my school progress unless it was for parent-teacher conferences. I graduated with average grades, and after I walked across that stage, my parents decided to celebrate by taking me to a place that was, without a doubt, more fun for my sister than for me. On my 18th birthday in July, everything came to a head. Even though it was my special day, it didn't feel like it was about me at all. I hoped we would finally go to my favorite restaurant, but instead, we ended up at a local knockoff of Chuck E. Cheese. This place became the default destination for any kind of celebration, including my high school graduation. I found myself surrounded by young children having their own parties. I felt out of place, bored, and stuck eating bland pizza and playing outdated arcade games for chances to win cheap prizes that didn't mean much to me. When it came time for cake, my parents brought out a pink cake decorated with white flowers. It had my name on it, but it was very clearly a cake for a girl. They lit only 10 candles and set the cake in front of my sister, expecting her to blow them out. At that moment, I was overwhelmed by all the frustration and anger I had built up inside me over the years. It hit me like a wave, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I started crying, and I'm sure I looked ridiculous. I was an 18-year-old boy crying in front of my entire family. Everyone seemed so shocked that time felt like it stopped. I stood up and began to let everything out. All the feelings I had kept hidden for so long poured out in a rush of words. My entire family witnessed my breakdown. After it ended, I went outside to sit by our family car to gather my thoughts. A few relatives followed me outside to offer their apologies, saying they hadn't known about the cake being for my sister and not me. I told them it didn't matter whether they knew or not. They had watched as my sister took over my life for 8 years. I never truly had my own birthdays or celebrations, they were all about her. Now, on what was supposed to be the biggest birthday celebration of my life, everyone expected me to smile and be happy while my sister got a cake made for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. Some family members started to apologize, claiming they thought I was okay with everything because my parents had said so. I told them that I had never been okay with it. My parents made me go along with it every year until I pretended to accept it. I spread my arms wide and looked around at all the decorations and party setup, asking if this looked like a place where I wanted to celebrate my graduation and birthday. No one came to my defense. It was clear that I was just the other kid while my sister got everything. I never had the chance to invite any of my friends because my parents had stopped letting me do that a long time ago. This happened after they got upset when my friends tried to speak up about my sister being allowed to blow out my birthday candles. I mean, there are 365 days in a year, and all I wanted was one special day that was truly about me and not about her. Instead, I ended up being seen as a greedy and spoiled child just for wanting my own birthday celebration. After that, I couldn't help but cry in a really ugly way. Eventually, my dad came outside and got mad at me for making such a big scene. He said my mom was crying too, and my sister was upset because I had ruined her moment. Now, everyone who witnessed this thought that my parents were bad at being parents. In that moment of anger, I yelled at my dad, telling him that he and my mom were indeed bad parents, and he should know exactly why. Just after I said that, the rest of my family swooped in like a pack of wolves to defend me, which was surprising. I had never seen anything like it before. My dad was backed up against the front door of the restaurant, feeling cornered, while most of the family went inside to confront my mom. My grandparents stayed outside with me and apologized for not seeing the situation clearly for so long. I didn't know what was being said inside, but it took about half an hour before my parents finally came back out. When they returned, they looked completely defeated. My mom was still sniffling from crying hard, and neither of them could look me in the eye. They awkwardly apologized for everything and suggested we could have the party again somewhere else. However, that didn't seem to satisfy the crowd. One of my uncles cleared his throat loudly, and my parents promised they would never make me share my birthday celebration with my sister again. They said she wouldn't blow out my candles anymore or receive presents on my birthday, and nothing would be about her during that time. Then, there was another awkward moment when my parents also apologized for getting a cake that clearly wasn't meant for me. They claimed they thought I wouldn't care about cake at my age. Oh, that was the wrong thing to say. I exploded with anger again and yelled that my age didn't matter. They had taken my birthday from me and had no good reason for it, and they knew it deep down. At that point, I felt there was no purpose in trying to redo the party because it was simply too late. They had shown me that I didn't mean anything to them and that they had ruined 8 years of my life leading up to adulthood. I couldn't imagine what future birthdays with them would even be like. When I expressed this, my dad started to get angry at me for speaking like that, but the rest of my family yelled at him, which made him quiet down. My grandfather told him that I was absolutely right and that there was no way my parents could undo the hurt they had caused. He pointed out that they had played favorites and treated me poorly since my sister was born. What's more, he said that the rest of the family had failed me too because they allowed it to happen, so I deserved more than just an apology. I deserved my life back. My mother broke down again, trying to come closer while crying my name and saying sorry, but I refused to let her get anywhere near me. Half of my family blocked her from getting to me. I just told them that I couldn't take this anymore, so I started to walk away. One of my aunts chased after me and brought me back. While I was in my own world, I could hear many family members yelling and cursing at my parents for what had just happened, but I was so upset that I couldn't even feel happy about them getting called out. What really bothered me was where my sister was during all this chaos. She was still inside the restaurant by herself, indulging in cake and tearing open the presents that were meant for me. To make matters worse, my parents actually served her cake after I had cried and walked out. You would think during such a chaotic moment, focusing on her would not have been their priority, but it was evident that they had been called out on that choice later. My grandparents managed to help me calm down and sit in their old minivan while the rest of the family cleared out the party. Meanwhile, my sister was having a huge tantrum because she got caught opening my presents, including a brand new smartphone that she threw across the room in a fit of rage. She threw the phone against the wall out of frustration, and it shattered because she couldn't keep it. This was particularly frustrating for her because she had just received a brand new smartphone only a few months before, on her own birthday. The anger and disappointment boiled inside me, and I vented my feelings by declaring that I never wanted to celebrate my birthday again. To comfort me, my grandparents offered me a place to stay overnight at their house. When I returned home, I still refused to talk to my parents. My mother was heartbroken, tears streaming down her face as she tried to reach out to me, but I remained silent. My father, on the other hand, was just as quiet as I was, leaving a thick tension in the air. The following weekend, my grandparents encouraged me to join them for dinner, hoping it would lift my spirits. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was taken aback to find a surprise party waiting for me. My parents were there, wearing forced smiles that screamed, "Please don't hate us." The atmosphere was festive, with a large chocolate cake adorned with 18 candles and a colorful banner displaying my name. They called it my happy belated birthday graduation party, a nod to the fact that I hadn't celebrated either occasion properly this year. Deep down, I knew that one good party couldn't erase 8 years of feeling overshadowed by favoritism. My sister, however, was less than thrilled. She sat at the table, arms crossed and lip curled in disgust because the spotlight was no longer on her like it used to be. Instead of singing the traditional happy birthday, the family awkwardly sang an altered version titled Happy Day. After I blew out the candles, my sister unleashed an ear-piercing scream that sent my parents rushing to calm her down. They had to take her out of the room momentarily, returning with her looking even more upset. She sulked quietly in her chair for the rest of the celebration. Despite everything, I did receive a new smartphone, while my sister faced consequences from our parents for her earlier outburst. The real surprise, though, was when the entire family pulled together to gift me a car. It was an old white Volvo, but to me, it felt like a treasure. My grandfather, who had a knack for fixing cars, had worked on it himself, and I was overjoyed the moment I saw it. Unfortunately, my sister did not share in my happiness. Once again, she erupted into another one of her infamous tantrums, demanding a car for herself. This time, my mother had to whisk her away to the bathroom, leaving behind a disappointed and defeated father. Family members began to voice their opinions about my sister's behavior, suggesting that my parents had raised her to be a spoiled princess. Their words echoed the truth of the situation. My sister had been given too much, too easily, and now she couldn't handle it when things didn't go her way. I eagerly took my new car out for a drive just days later, but in a shocking turn of events, my sister vandalized it. In a fit of rage, she picked up a hammer and smashed 2 of the side windows and cracked the windshield, rendering the car unusable. My parents managed to intervene before she could do any more damage, though she screamed and thrashed about, trying to bite them in her fury. Everyone was furious, especially my grandparents, who had invested so much time and effort into the car. The reality of the situation hit hard. My sister couldn't grasp the fact that I was allowed to have something she couldn't. Several relatives chastised my parents, warning them that by coddling her, they were setting her up for a life filled with disappointment. They insisted that if my parents didn't teach her respect, she would struggle as an adult. Eventually, my sister faced consequences for her actions. She was grounded for the entire summer and sent away to boarding school as the school year began. My mother cried deeply about this decision, but my father was firm, recognizing it as the only way to begin correcting the damage done over the years. They acknowledged their mistakes fully, not that they had much choice, given the overwhelming support from family against their parenting choices. Life at the boarding school was harsh for my sister. She despised the uniforms, the rules, and everything about it. It became clear that the consequences of her actions were just beginning, and the journey ahead would be far from easy for her. She has a strong dislike for the rules that confine her, and lately, she has been telling lies almost all the time. Yet, with cameras seemingly everywhere she goes now, escaping the consequences of her dishonesty has become impossible. Her behavior has created a rift between her and our parents, who have attempted to visit her several times. Each time, she has reacted with anger, screaming at them for placing her in that environment. From what I've heard, this situation may continue to define her school life until she turns 18. In the meantime, my parents decided to pay for the repairs to my car. They arranged for an autoglass company to replace the windows and windshield, and now my car looks as good as it did before the damage occurred. Back in August, my grandfather reached out to me with a job opportunity he had found through a friend. However, the job was located 40 miles away, which meant I would have to move out of my parents' house to avoid a long commute. I was excited about the idea of moving out and starting fresh, but finding my first apartment proved to be more challenging than I had anticipated. I needed to secure approval for a credit card just to be eligible for a studio apartment, but I eventually managed to do it. Since September, I have been living in my own place. My parents continue to reach out to me, but I choose to speak to them infrequently. When we do talk, I often feel awkward and uneasy. My grandfather has shared his thoughts, suggesting that my parents might not truly want to confront how they failed as parents. He believes that trying to gain my forgiveness is more about helping themselves feel better than about making amends with me, but I am not ready to forgive them, at least not anytime soon. Finally, gaining independence and a sense of happiness away from my family has become a priority for me. My parents have lost significant pieces of their lives. They no longer have me or my sister under their roof. This situation has forced them to work extra hours to cover the high costs of sending my sister to boarding school, not to mention the expenses related to throwing a party for me and fixing my car. The atmosphere at home feels empty, filled only with the weight of angry relatives and the demands of their jobs. It reflects what seems like incredible misery, and while I don't take pleasure in their suffering, it is evident that their current struggles stem from their own actions. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who has given me awards. It truly means a lot. I realize that my post was lengthy and may have felt overwhelming, but getting it all out has relieved some of the burden I was carrying. Some commenters have questioned the authenticity of my experiences, and while I understand that skepticism, I lived through these events. Sadly, some parents really do treat their children poorly. A number of people have reached out to me, sharing similar or even worse experiences with their parents. With so many bad parents out there, it doesn't seem far-fetched to believe what mine did. The incident where my entire family rushed back into the restaurant to confront my parents might seem exaggerated to some, but I come from a tight-knit family that values group dynamics. Togetherness can quickly shift from support to collective judgment against one person during family gatherings. I have witnessed this firsthand, such as when a drunken cousin was surrounded by family members and taken to another room to sober up due to his inappropriate behavior. I am not particularly fond of group mentalities, yet this situation ultimately served to protect me. My parents were shamed beyond words for their actions, and they struggled to explain their behavior without sounding even worse. They have essentially given up, unable to provide excuses and desperately trying to win my approval. While many have praised my relatives for their support, much of that help seems rooted in shame. They were present for most of my 8 birthdays, except for 2 years because of COVID. During those 6 celebrations, they merely observed with disapproving looks as my sister got to blow out my candles while they remained silent. This lack of response stemmed from the complicated dynamics within our family. My dad is the son of our intimidating grandfather, who has a reputation that can either be protective or destructive. When my grandfather ultimately stated that the entire family was to blame for their lack of action in my life, it shifted the narrative. The entire family felt a sense of shame over the situation, and as a result, they all contributed money to help pay for my car. With so many relatives pitching in, the amount each person had to donate was minimal, making it possible for them to afford it together. When I registered the car in my name, I had the receipt that proved they bought it for $2,000. This amount did not include the additional money they spent on parts and new tires. My grandfather took it upon himself to give the car a thorough tune-up, changing all the necessary fluids to ensure it was in excellent running condition. Meanwhile, my grandmother dedicated her time to deep cleaning the interior, making sure it was spotless. I am incredibly grateful to all of them for their generosity and support, but I also feel the need to create some distance. I want to take time for myself to figure things out independently, which likely means I won't see my parents again until the Thanksgiving or Christmas holidays. Interestingly, some people have drawn comparisons between my sister and the character Eric Cartman from the animated series South Park. This comparison holds a great deal of truth. My sister struggled with her weight because our parents often fed her a lot of junk food, and she has developed a strong aversion to eating anything healthy. I once witnessed her bizarre choice of putting gummy bears on top of mashed potatoes, a combination that really turns my stomach just thinking about it. Her poor eating habits have led to her spending long stretches of time in the bathroom, as her body struggled to cope. To help with this issue, our parents had to purchase fiber snacks, which were not cheap, in hopes that she would consume something that was actually nutritious. Moreover, my sister has a very controlling personality and constantly tries to boss me around. This behavior is one of the main reasons I often choose to lock myself in my room to get away from her incessant orders. Her domineering nature led her to lose many of her friends over time, yet our parents would just tell her that the other kids were jealous of how special she is. Unsurprisingly, my sister frequently refers to herself as a princess. The epic tantrums she throws when she doesn't get her way remind me a lot of Eric Cartman's antics. Although I know my sister is not unintelligent, she doesn't put in the effort needed for her schoolwork and has maintained a C average. If she applied herself, there's a strong possibility she could easily achieve straight A's. Recently, I discovered that I've been banned from the subreddit, and although I'm not sure why, I suspect it might be due to the length of my previous post. Regardless of the reason, I can no longer respond to comments, which is disappointing. I do want to express my gratitude to everyone who provided me with positive feedback. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. As for an update on my life, it has now been about a year since my parents chose to give my birthday to my sister every year for 8 years. I had not logged back in for quite a while because I thought I was done sharing my story. However, after some time passed, I decided to check in, only to find numerous private messages asking for updates. What I'm about to share is mostly based on what my parents and grandparents have told me, so if it seems a bit unbelievable, just remember that I'm retelling what I have learned. I am doing well, but unfortunately, my parents and little sister are struggling. After my last post, my sister made several attempts to get out of boarding school. When none of her lies or schemes worked, she tried the tactic of simply refusing to participate in any activities, but that plan flopped as well. Eventually, in a desperate measure, she attempted a hunger strike, claiming she would not eat anything until our parents came and picked her up. My mother nearly rushed to the school to rescue her, but my father had to stop her and remind her that my sister's behavior was the result of their parenting choices. The hunger strike was short-lived, lasting less than 2 days before my sister began demanding food in the cafeteria. The rules were strict. She wasn't allowed any sweets or junk food unless it was healthy. This decision was made after a pediatrician warned my parents that my sister, who they referred to as Little Miss Sunshine, was at risk of developing future diabetes and even had the possibility of stunted growth unless she took control of her health and ate a balanced diet, not gummy bears on mashed potatoes. Of course, my sister then attempted to assert herself as a bully toward the other girls at the boarding school, but they did not allow her to push them around. One day, she picked a fight and ended up getting beaten up pretty badly by a group of other girls. They ganged up on her and kicked her until a teacher intervened. While she did not suffer any serious injuries, she was left scraped and bruised all over her body. True to form, she blamed everyone but herself for what happened. She pointed fingers at everyone around her but never looked in the mirror. I heard she actually said that the other girls should just follow her orders, but they didn't listen. Because of that, they decided to shun her. I also heard she threw a massive tantrum about it. For so long, she had gotten her way with everyone, so the idea of not getting what she wanted was just unimaginable to her. My mother used to sneak junk food to my sister while she was at boarding school. However, when my sister got caught with it, my parents ended up having a huge fight. After the truth came out, my mother stopped trying to sneak her any more treats. My sister, who has always had a big love for junk food, still dreams of being a junk food addict. Honestly, after a year, she hasn't changed much at all. It doesn't really surprise me, to be honest. The only slight improvement is that she has become a bit more open to the idea that she isn't the center of the universe. After just a few months in boarding school, her plans to escape only got more extreme. She even started self-harming to try to manipulate her way back home. It was shocking when she somehow got a knife from the cafeteria and climbed onto a table, threatening to hurt herself unless they gave her candy and sent her home. Yes, she didn't just want to go home, she specifically demanded candy too. I remember mentioning before that I had seen her put gummy bears on mashed potatoes, and that wasn't a one-time thing. She loved putting gummy bears on any food she didn't like. It was the only way our parents could get her to eat things. Can you imagine putting gummy bears on a salad? It completely misses the point of eating healthy. But she would regularly bring a bag of gummy bears to the dinner table. I can't even look at gummy bears anymore without being reminded of her antics. During that wild episode, when the boarding school staff rushed to calm her down, they tried to bring her some snacks. But then something went wrong. She slipped and fell off that table, resulting in a broken left arm, fractured clavicle, and a concussion on her forehead. At that moment, even the boarding school had reached their limit and didn't want her back. After her hospitalization, her drastic attempt to get attention landed her in a much worse place, a mental ward for kids. Now, she was forced into therapy and was diagnosed with a significant case of narcissism, which she had developed growing up. She couldn't leave the ward unless my parents came to take her out. They also made her continue her studies from there while sticking to a very strict healthy diet. This situation could truly be described as her own personal hell. My mother often thought about going to the ward to get her precious daughter back, but that led to a huge fight with my father. During that argument, in a fit of anger, she grabbed the nearest object, which happened to be a bottle sitting on the counter. It broke on his face, leaving him with a cracked cheekbone and some nasty cuts. The police needed to be called, and he had to go to the hospital. Meanwhile, my mother was taken away in a police car. After that, she underwent a psychological evaluation and ended up being committed for several months. During that time, she had to confront her own intense need to enable my sister, which stemmed from some serious mental traumas from her own childhood. Nobody would tell me any details about that, though. There has been ongoing talk about a potential divorce between my parents, but so far, they have only been sleeping in separate rooms. As for me, I recently celebrated my 19th birthday. My grandparents threw me a nice party at a restaurant I love, and both my parents came, along with my sister, who was given a temporary release from the mental ward. I could see the bitterness in her eyes as she sat there. She looked a bit different, with a noticeable loss of weight since she hadn't had junk food in ages, and her strict diet was going to stay in place for a while. In fact, the junk food from my birthday party was the first treat she had indulged in for quite some time. Still, she couldn't handle not being the center of attention. When it was time for me to blow out my birthday candles, it was as if she was wishing for the spotlight to shine on her once again. She didn't scream, but instead, she began to cry in a way that was hard to watch. It wasn't just any crying, it was the kind that comes from deep frustration and desperation. I can tell you right now that this was just another one of her attempts to manipulate the situation. As she cried, she kept repeating the word, "Why?" over and over again. I know she's only 9, but it's important to remember that just last year when she was 8, she threw a fit because she wanted her own car. I was gifted a car when I turned 18, and she thought it was fair to expect the same at her age. It's ridiculous because she can't even get a learner's permit until she turns 15. On my 19th birthday, things got out of hand. My sister threw herself on the floor because there wasn't any pizza or gifts for her, claiming there were no prizes or anything special. Then, she started cursing at our parents, so upset that she actually tried to storm out of the restaurant. It was like she was trying to mimic the way I had reacted the previous year, but in her own twisted version. Some might say I'm overthinking it, but I know my sister. If she believes that acting a certain way will get her what she wants, she'll definitely go for it. When things escalated, my parents ended up apologizing to everyone around us and decided to take my sister home early. But before they left, my grandfather approached them to have a conversation. I managed to gather some details later from my grandmother. He told my parents that they must not give in to my sister's demands or take her to any parties, because if they did, this kind of behavior would never stop. He made it clear that they needed to put their foot down for good. After that talk, my sister was dragged out of the restaurant while kicking and screaming, clearly realizing that her tantrums weren't working this time. She was taken back to the ward the following morning, and that's where she is now. I have no idea how much time she will spend there, but one thing is certain, she's incredibly stubborn. She's just a kid, but she's the most stubborn one I've ever seen. I suspect she won't change her ways until she hits rock bottom. Until then, she will remain in a place that doesn't enable her demands at all. Not even my parents have tried to blame me for her actions over the past year. They've accepted that I am not to blame for any of this, and they have come to terms with the fact that they raised her to be a narcissist. Enabling a narcissist is like feeding an addiction, based on what I've seen and heard. My sister hasn't been diagnosed with anything other than narcissism, and from what I gather, she's actually smarter than I am. I heard she was tested and has an IQ of around 110. However, she doesn't like to put in any effort unless there's something in it for her. This is the way she was raised, and I think it will take years to help her improve. As for me, I've been doing well on my own. I've had to learn to budget properly and take care of all my own needs. Adulting isn't easy, but it's still 1,000 times better than the life I had with my parents and sister. Someone mentioned that it doesn't make sense for my sister to be in a long-term ward just for her narcissism, and I agree. Normally, that wouldn't be the case, but if there are deeper issues, it seems they're keeping that information from me. I know there are some things they don't share, and I can't just ask the doctors because I'm not her parent. It's also worth mentioning that my sister is very self-destructive. She has threatened to use a knife on herself just to get out of boarding school, and that's just one instance of many similar situations since she's been in the ward. While she's been there, she's started to understand that she's not a princess, but she still clings to the idea of doing whatever it takes to escape. After my 19th birthday, she made threats of self-harm to my parents if they didn't take her out for fast food, and when they didn't give in, she tried to harm herself again. One of her biggest tactics is hitting her head against the wall. My mother was hesitant about reporting this behavior to the ward, but my father insisted. Over the past month, her attempts at self-harm have decreased, but she has a history of using it as a form of emotional blackmail. I've heard that she lies and claims her doctors hurt her, but the stories never seem to match up. This makes me think that, along with her narcissism, she might also have a tendency to lie pathologically. This could explain why she's in a long-term ward in the first place. If she were home, I know my parents would gradually give in to her demands. My parents would eventually give in to her demands once again, and then things would revert back to how they were before, which is probably what Little Miss Sunshine is counting on. To update you on the situation, I've learned a bit more about her. First off, I realize I may have sounded foolish when I claimed my sister was smarter than me. Some of you pointed out mistakes in my posts and highlighted the gaps in my arguments. You're right to do so. My grades in school were not exactly impressive, with a D and C average. Math, in particular, was always my Achilles heel. I also made a mistake about my sister's age, repeatedly stating it wrong. I often tell people she's 10 years younger than me, and in the heat of the moment, the numbers got jumbled in my head. When you do the math properly, I was actually 8 years old when my sister was born in June. She was 3 when she first blew out my birthday candles. The truth is, I'm not good at math, and I sometimes keep certain details a bit vague or slightly altered to maintain some level of anonymity. However, looking back, I realize that this isn't truly anonymous at all, since anyone in my family could easily recognize my writing. From the very day my sister arrived, everything changed for me. This feeling of resentment isn't just typical jealousy you might expect from an older brother. Sure, my sister didn't blow out my candles until she was 3, but she was celebrated alongside me from the start, even on my birthdays. Picture this, I'm the birthday boy, and instead of getting the attention I deserved, my parents are busy showing off a baby to all the guests. It was hard to feel special when I felt completely overlooked until it was finally time for cake. My grandparents tried to balance things out, which made those days a little less painful. They even explained to me that it was understandable since my mother had a tough time with my sister's birth. But as time went on, the same pattern repeated itself. On my 9th birthday, nobody acknowledged anything special about me. Then on my 10th birthday, my parents repeated the same mistake, focusing on my sister's baby achievements while my gifts felt more like leftovers meant for toddlers than anything for a 10-year-old. Even though my name was on the tags, these extra gifts didn't feel like they were truly meant for me. By the time my 11th birthday rolled around, the situation turned really sour. I discovered that my sister had gifts with her name on them, and my parents insisted that she blow out my candles. Everyone at the party witnessed this, and yet no one stepped in to say that it was wrong. From that point forward, every birthday seemed to be more about my sister than me. My parties became venues focused on her interests, and I even had to let her help unwrap my presents. It felt like a setup instead of a celebration for me. Fast forward to my 18th birthday, and all those years of feeling overlooked just erupted. That's why I often say my birthdays were overshadowed for 8 years, but really, it felt like a full decade. Even when my parents finally admitted they had messed up, it didn't make things better for me. I might act like I can move past what happened, but deep down, I'm not convinced I ever will. Someone pointed out to me that you can't be officially diagnosed as a narcissist until you turn 18. I wasn't really informed about this stuff, and I had only taken my father's word for it before. So, I called him this morning to talk about it. He was curious about how I found that out, and I simply said, Google. He sighed and admitted that my sister was showing signs that could indicate she might develop narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, and some other issues. But they can't say for sure until she's older. He also hinted that my mother might have a mental disorder too, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. Eventually, my parents confessed that my mother was diagnosed with both a certain disorder and PTSD a few months ago, stemming from some childhood traumas that she's not willing to share, and I'm not going to push her for that information either. Whatever those past experiences were, they must have been tough, and I can respect her decision to keep that part of her life private. It's really tough when I asked my dad why I got only the simplest details and a bunch of white lies. When I brought it up, he got angry and told me it was because my sister is their problem and not mine. He figured if he just told me that, I'd drop it and move on. He insisted that they need to focus on my sister, and I should just concentrate on my future and forget about dealing with Little Miss Sunshine forever. Strangely enough, that was one of the most sensible things he has ever said to me. Now, about Little Miss Sunshine, there's no set timeline on how long she'll be in that ward. I had another question from my dad that someone had mentioned to me, whether my sister has ever talked about wanting to kill me while she was there. The answer was kind of in the middle. My sister did blame me for certain things, but she put a lot more blame on our parents. Her main issue with me is this twisted belief that everything that's mine should be hers too. She even gets jealous that I have my own apartment now, which just drove her to have more tantrums and demands for the same things I have. Therapy has helped her calm down little by little over time, which is why she was invited to my 19th birthday celebration. But her behavior on that day shot up again. It's kind of like when a toddler claims everything as their own. My sister has developed this whole complex around my birthday, and I can honestly say that's entirely on my parents. She truly believes she has a right to my birthday because that's how it's been for as long as she can remember. That's why she lost it last year and why she went off the rails this year. To her, my birthday has always belonged to her. My parents have urged me to leave things alone, insisting that my sister needs a lot of time to be treated and there's no guarantee she'll ever truly get better. My mom is in therapy herself now and her own disorder is being treated with medication. Because of that, she's often really tired and lethargic. Surprisingly, she still managed to keep her job, even after that incident when she hit my dad with a bottle and needed to spend some time in a facility. Her boss is super understanding and let her work from home afterward, though that came with pay cuts and some kind of demotion. There's something I didn't mention in my last post. This year, the birthday celebration wasn't on the actual date of my birth. Instead, we celebrated the belated party that was held for me last year. Honestly, I'm okay with that because the real day of my birthday has been ruined for me. I was born right at the end of July, and the belated birthday party took place about a week later in August. From now on, that's the day I want to celebrate. Lastly, people keep asking me how I'm doing. I was doing fine, maybe even pretty decent. Sure, adulting has its challenges, like paying bills and managing finances, but overall, I was alright. Then coming back to Reddit to talk about all this made me stressed. It feels like I'm mentally slipping back into a tough spot. I really thought I was okay, but now I'm just edgy and cynical all the time. My boss even noticed and sent me home early because of how I've been acting. They know what I've been through, but I still feel awful about it. Just having coffee this morning made my heart race. I think it might be time for me to look into local support groups for free counseling. I have to be careful with my budget, but for now, I just want to relax and take a break from everything. I worry that if I come back here again, I might end up just as stressed. I'm so grateful to everyone who read my posts and understood where I'm coming from. You're really good people. But right now, I need to focus on getting my life back together and putting my past behind me. Oh, and I realized I messed up the math again about my age when my sister was born. I typed everything too quickly and didn't really proofread. I've just been such a mess today that my boss suggested I take a sick day. I even threw up this morning because of the stress. My head's been pounding, and I just need to sort myself out. I've been dealing with a pretty intense headache all day long. It has been so bad that I found myself going in and out of the shower repeatedly, just hoping that the water would help ease my pain. Most of the time, I've just been lying in bed, trying to find some comfort but not really able to. It's only now, after hours of feeling miserable, that I'm starting to feel just a bit better. If I had known that sharing my feelings with the world would make me feel this way, I honestly would have kept it to myself. To make things worse, last night I stumbled upon a post that really hit home for me. It was from someone who shared their experience with parents that are just as difficult as mine. This person wrote about how their parents cut up their older child's cake, a cake that the older child had paid for all on their own. They did this simply because their golden child, who I think is around the same age as my sister, cried and wanted a piece. It's ridiculous. The older kid went through all the trouble of organizing a custom cake and planning a party, and then the parents decided to ruin it the night before just because their favorite child threw a tantrum. In the end, the original poster was so fed up with their parents' behavior that they cancelled the entire party, and honestly, I don't blame them one bit. Reading about that made me realize there are way too many parents out there operating just like mine. They only change when they're embarrassed, but deep down, they are still the same. Right now, I've decided to go low contact with my parents. I'm also getting ready to visit my grandparents to have a serious talk about everything happening in my life. I'm feeling uncertain about whether I want to share more on here or respond to any comments. In fact, just the thought of checking my inbox makes me anxious. I really feel like I need a break from Reddit, and honestly, I might not come back for a while.